welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. What if the world responded to the threat of climate change in the same way that it is currently responding to the novel coronavirus pandemic, epidemic?
Seems like it's becoming a pandemic, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And to start off, I am going to pull up a graphic. It says, and we'll post it on our page because it's created by somebody called @NCStin. I'm assuming STINN. That's from Twitter. Scientists, you should wash your hands because of the coronavirus. People respond, I'm going to stop flying, hoard masks, work from home, and totally rearrange my life. And it goes on. Also scientists, the climate crisis will kill millions. We must use clean power and change how we get to work. And people, no way. So,
Yeah.
So that is ironic, but not surprising given how our systems have evolved to respond to very specific threats in the here and now, and we don't really do well with future potential threats.
So in essence, what you're saying is, if we saw that that Coronado Island was disappearing at 5 p.m. today, then we might be able to get our act together. But otherwise, the idea that it's 5 years, so 2030 is only 10 years out. We should be able to, our mind should be able to comprehend 10 years. I get 50, can't really comprehend 50 years. Unless you're on our end looking back and you go, wow, those 50 years were fast.
Yeah.
But for most people, they can't really see 50 years. But 10?
But I think, too, the idea that this will actually happen, people haven't comprehended it. That I loved, and let's post it on our episode notes, that link that you shared recently on Facebook, where you can click on it and it shows where you live, if you live on the coast, if it's going to be underwater. Is your place in Massachusetts going to be?
It's not, and that's, it's not according to that map, which is very nice, because as you know, I live a couple blocks from the water.
Yes.
And I am very concerned that I've got all my money in that little house. And, am I going to be able to get out of there in time? And am I going to be able to get my money out of there in time? And really, I'm starting to see the differences, but I'm much more conscious of it than the average person.
Right. So that's good. You'll get out before the stampede starts.
Well, yeah, I hope so. It's interesting because our neighborhood is, you were there. So our neighborhood was built in the early 60s, and it's a lot of ranch homes, which I don't know if all of our listeners understand ranch. So one story, my house is like 1,300 square feet. It's small. One story, centralized kitchen, more boxy kind of thing. And it's not the way things are built anymore. So all these homes they're using the foundation, but they're all going up and making them these giant homes, especially ones that are right adjacent to the water. Like I said, I'm about 2 blocks from the water, maybe a little bit less, but I'm not sitting on the water. The ones that are sitting on the water, those are exploding. They're making them these, shaking a 1,200, 1,300 square foot house and making it 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet.
So I'm curious, just because I have been to your place, and I know how close you are to the water. I guess the advantage of being two floors or two floors is that maybe one floor will still be above water.
Well, if you're on stilts, you're on stilts. Yeah.
But you're pretty close to the water and you're not that high. So I wonder what's going on with that. How is it that you're going to be unscathed, do you think?
I don't know. I think it might have to do with we're kind of in a protected area of the bay. So we're in Cape Cod. We're not on the, we're across from where I am is Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. And they have the open ocean beyond them. So we're kind of in a shallower area between, I don't know.
Well, clearly it's going to work for you. And
well, not for my entire neighborhood. Not so the part of my neighborhood that is farther west. Yes, they're going to be more underwater, but I'm just a little bit on the hillside, and I'm like, okay, so if I stay there till 2070, which of course I'll be dead by then, if I stay there long enough, I will be waterfront.
You know what? And that's funny because I looked at that map and I went to the West Coast because, of course, we own a house in the city of Victoria. Not that far, not as close to the water as you are, but it is, of course, Victoria's on the Pacific Ocean and on Vancouver Island. And I looked, and some of our favorite places to walk are going to be underwater. But in fact, we are not. So I did say to my husband, hey, we'll be closer to the water.
Yeah.
Which, okay, you realize, folks, we are just joking. This is not a good thing. But he did say none of those places are going to be allowed to go underwater. That's his belief. But the cost to all of us, taxpayers, to build that infrastructure to keep it usable, it's going to be expensive. We know climate change is going to be expensive, but let's bring the conversation back around to what's going on in this huge response to this threat, which is a threat, and we're not downplaying it, and we all should be washing our hands and avoiding public gatherings and all of that. But scientists have been telling us for how many years now? 40 years? That climate change is going to have a huge economic impact. It's going to impact people's lives. People are going to suffer from.
Well, people are suffering. So I think that's,
yes.
I think that, so the people that are, the people in Africa or the people in Syria, certainly, I mean, people that are already experiencing it, but it hasn't hit mainstream white middle class demographics.
But if you think about the pandemic at this point, and it's early in March, it actually hasn't hit that population. I just hit my microphone. It hasn't hit that population either yet. It's just the threat of it hitting that population. And I think part of it is the disconnect. Yes, there's a war in Syria. Yes, people are losing crops in Africa. Yes, there's flooding and fires, say, in Australia. But it's not like a climate virus that they can say, aha, they can do a DNA test or a swab and say, aha, that was the climate virus. It's one step removed. And so it shouldn't, it's not logical or rational, but it feels there's still that disconnect that we can say, oh, is it climate change? I don't know.
Well, so to bring that to a personal level, I do have a girlfriend, and I won't call her out and embarrass her.
Shall remain nameless.
who is self-quarantining. She lives in the Seattle area. She's self-quarantining. She's not even seeing her boyfriend. She's when she goes to the grocery store, she's going to the grocery store with plastic, with rubber gloves on. She's only taking walks by herself. And I get her concern because she does have, she's not quite 60, but she has had some respiratory issues. So she's had like bronchitis a number of times, pneumonia, and it's taking her a while to get her lung capacity back. So that's what she's seeing. Okay. And that's her concern. But yet at the same time, she drives a giant SUV. She flies all over the place. She, I don't know what her plastic consumption is, but I see, the disconnect. She's very concerned about this coronavirus because it will affect her personally, but she doesn't see that all the actions that she takes on a daily basis will affect her or her progeny.
Mm-hmm. There's that disconnect, and we're pointing fingers out there, and we're both guilty of.
Oh,
yeah, but that's a really good example. It just sort of illustrates somebody who's taking the coronavirus very seriously,
mm-hmm.
and yet,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's most of us that,
Mm-hmm.
and yet. So let's talk a little bit about this paper, which came out in January, I believe. It was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science.
Mm.
And it has 14 co-authors. And it's interesting because it actually tries to take a scientific look at the social tipping points that will push us, or again, not push so much, but sort of precipitate the changes that are needed. And it can be little tweaks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll put a link to that paper. What I have in front of me is Dave Roberts' article in Vox responding. So Dave Roberts, who has written for grist.org for years and published an article on Vox recently looking at the paper. And he starts off by saying, social tipping points are the only hope for the climate. And at this point, the targets enshrined in the Paris Climate Agreement, holding the rise in global average temperature to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius, with efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius, are beyond the reach of incrementalism. That means we're not doing it in small steps.
Because we've waited too long.
Exactly.
So now we need something giant we have to take immediate action, and we can't pussyfoot around it anymore because we've been doing nothing.
And that is the worry, of course, about either Joe Biden or, heaven forbid, the orange virus, as some people refer to your current president,
oh God,
getting reelected, because that's exactly Biden does not seem to grasp.
I don't know if it's the age thing. I think that young people are getting it, but it's those who are fat and happy that don't want things to change.
Well, and having said that, Bernie Sanders is around the same age as Biden, but he seems to get the climate issue.
Yeah, he does.
And
so
the
maybe
system change that's needed.
Well, he's been an activist. I don't think that we'd consider Biden having been an activist his entire life.
Oh no.
What?
Oh no, he's not been an activist.
Oh, okay.
I agree.
No, and so I mean, when you're enmeshed in the paradigm as it exists, the lobbying and the corporate culture and all that kind of stuff, that is how our system has worked. We won't say who it's worked for, but it has. It's what everything that we've known up until now, and we're being pushed up against. It's not working anymore. But those people who it's worked for so well, who are in the establishment, who are the ones who are making the laws and and have all the power
and money,
they don't want it to change, even though those of us who are not in power I guess that's why I say the age issue, because I see for young people, they see how stacked it is against them, the whole system, not just climate, but the whole system. And they understand the need for systemic change versus the oldsters are just kind of like, well, we can do a little tweak here and we can do a little tweak here. And it's like,
Yeah. But so this paper that's just published looks at the systems that must change rapidly to address climate change. None of it is like revolutionary. The energy production system, obviously, human settlements. Because
I found that interesting because I didn't realize that buildings are the source of 20% of global emissions. I didn't get that.
We should probably know that from Project Drawdown, shouldn't we?
We should, yeah. And there is an amazing organization that's out of Palo Alto that's trying to build or that is working on a concrete that is a carbon sink. So that may be somebody that we actually want to talk to. But I didn't realize that it was 20%.
And with the world urbanizing, it will probably rise.
Right.
And interestingly, the third system that they looked at that has to change is the financial system.
And kudos, to 350 to Bill McKibben and Stop the Money Pipeline.
Yes.
That
and the divestment movement, which has been around for longer.
Yep. So that system looks like we are starting to change.
And that could flip pretty quickly.
Well, I think we've been seeing that in the last few weeks, right?
Yeah.
Starting with Goldman Sachs, and then as we talked last week about Brown Brown University being the first of the Ivies. So we're starting to see it. As one does it, the next one looks at it and goes, "Oh, maybe not such a good investment anymore."
And it's not just that. With this whole Saudi Arabia OPEC debacle. Along with the coronavirus and the stock market plunge, I have to say Alberta, which is there's a number of provinces in Canada that are depend on oil producing revenue, but Alberta is the primary one, and they are really, really hurting because they've had governments that have been entrenched for the most part in the status quo and who blame and point fingers at the federal government when things go badly. It's because Trudeau wants to put a price on carbon. It's because our prime minister wants to put a price on carbon, not that global markets don't want oil in the same way. And this has really brought that home. So it's painful. It's a painful truth. But there's pain ahead on this road because it's taken us so long it's like we said, it's not incremental changes. These are going to be dramatic. So yes, stock up on toilet paper, but maybe also beans and rice. But that's another discussion.
I have some hilarious stories about stocking up on toilet paper. So
maybe that can be our good news / LOL of the day, because it is kind of funny that that's where people go. So the fourth one that they looked at was norms and values, and they talk about how human beings are strongly social creatures and are influenced by our peers. And so when electric cars and solar panels start becoming commonplace, then that has a ripple effect, as our friend Sandra would say. And the education system, which plays a large role in social transformation. And the last one that they looked at is information feedbacks. And I'm just going to read what Dave Robert writes about this. He says, "This one is the most interesting to me because it best fits the criteria of being relatively easy to influence with small interventions and associated in the past with rapid social change. The idea is just to make carbon flows in the economy more visible to consumers, businesses, and governments through better tracking, monitoring, and corporate disclosure." And he gives an example of this effect at work, which is the story of the toxics release inventory in the US, which did nothing but reveal to US citizens which businesses were releasing toxic pollution and where. But apparently there was a resulting public blowback that prompted enormous changes. I don't know anything about that, but I am taking Dave Roberts' word for that. And he goes on to say the researchers stress that all of these systems, so the 6 ones that I listed, are interconnected and interrelated, operating on different timescales, and that cascading changes in one or more could help trigger similar changes in the others, which is good, obviously, because they're all going to need to change. So it's not a guarantee, it's not a panacea, but it's an interesting paper because it's really the first time that scientific based inquiry has looked at what do we need to do. I mean, Al Gore has been saying it for a while. Oh, we're just on the verge of this shift, and of course that's what we're all hoping for. But are we? And I think this paper says maybe it's possible. And this is how we move it along. And in fact, Dave Roberts mentions a book that's coming out. There's an economist, Robert H. Frank, has a book coming out soon that's called Under the Influence, which is about just this sort of social contagion. In other words, how to shift things socially and how climate policymakers can use it. So let's keep an eye out for that, Rose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds, well, obviously we've seen Greta as a primary example of an influencer that's really in a year's time. And we know that there have been a lot of people working on climate, and there's been a youth movement for a long time, but this one young girl, for some reason, she hit people at the heart and then her influence has been gigantic. Yeah, don't discount the influencers. And I guess the hopeful thing about this article is that don't count us out yet. There's still hope, even though the window is closing, for us to be taking action.
Yes, and I loved his final paragraph, which is from a post he wrote on the same subject back 7 years ago in 2013. And he writes, will unexpected, and this is Dave Roberts, will unexpected rapid changes in coming decades be good or bad, positive or negative? That depends on millions of individual choices made in the interim. Some of those choices, if they happen at just the right moment, could be just the perturbations that spark cascading changes in social, economic, or technological systems. Some of those choices, in other words, will be incredibly significant. Which ones? That we cannot know, but it could be any of them, anytime. Precisely because we cannot know, because any one of our choices might be the proverbial butterfly's wings, we must act. We must take advantage of every affordance, grasp every opportunity. We don't know when history might unlock the door, so we have no choice but to keep pushing on it. And really, what else are we going to do? This is a refrain for this podcast, is it not?
I would say so. We're well, in our small way, we're trying to just influence one person, who that person will influence one other person, who that person will influence one other person. And so by each of us doing our own thing, and you don't even have to be loud about it. You just have to be visible.
You can be loud if you want.
Right. But a lot of people don't want to be loud.
We give you permission.
Okay.
But whatever it is, however you push on the door, I like that visual. We all, you are pushing on that door, Rose. I am. Greta is. All of those millions of people around the world are now pushing on the door. Whereas when I started back in 2009, it was a whole lot fewer people pushing on the door. It was pretty lonely, and there were people who've been doing it for 20 years before I did it. And imagine.
So you've been in it for so long. What do you think why are there more people now? Are people becoming more uncomfortable? What's been the tipping point to get people to take it more seriously? Is it personal discomfort?
It's more.
Is it an understanding that they didn't have before? It's become more mainstream. Sorry, I'm asking too many questions.
No, it's that it's hitting people on a more personal level, more
Mhm.
people on a personal level. It's the
Mhm.
fires in Australia. It's the Greta Thunbergs and young people who are saying, no, you can't do this to us. It's the
Mhm.
children talking to their parents. And again, is it the majority? No. But there is, I mean, I talk about in my book, and I've said it before in this podcast, when I started in 2009 talking about climate change, it was so socially unacceptable to ever
Mhm.
mention climate change. I've said too, it was like flatulence, public flatulence. Like people were just were like embarrassed and looked away, and it was such a weird kind of
Mm.
experience. And so that kind of social censure, not that anybody ever said, oh, Christine, don't say that. They didn't need to say that. I knew it intuitively, and I did it anyways because I was a climate activist and I'm talking about this. And so I talk about it because I was on different committees. If it was ever appropriate to mention the weather or climate change, I would mention it. But it was uncomfortable for me and for the people I was talking
Mm.
to.
Hmm.
And that has changed.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it is definitely coming up more and more in conversation everywhere. I hear it. I hear. I'm in the middle of it, so it's hard to know is it coming from everywhere. But I do hear it and read more about it and see more about it. Yeah. Can we turn the ship fast enough?
Well, but look at what's being done with the pandemic. They are
Mhm.
shutting down economies.
Mhm.
They are making choices that are disadvantageous to their economies for the safety of their population and for public health.
Okay,
So,
and so I do have to play devil's advocate there
yes.
because I did send you the article about the airline industry that is still is flying empty planes
Mhm.
to hold on to their space. So the idea is that certain airports, or maybe all airports, the airlines are contractually have a contract that they have to fly 80% of their said flights, or they lose their space. And so what's happening is even though there are no people on the planes, they're flying these planes anyway and emitting tons of carbon and all that kind of stuff. So
So what
yeah,
that to me that just says, yeah, the system has to change. That's
yeah.
part of the system.
Well, that's just so ridiculous. It's like whoever thinks that that's a good idea, but yet pilots are getting on their planes and doing it.
That's the system, and they have to do it. Like it's set up that way. And so does the system have to change?
Mm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so do we have any good news? You had a joke.
It was actually a personal story about toilet paper. My girlfriend she was at a grocery store the other day, and she was actually in the restroom, and the grocery store was out of toilet paper. As she's in Seattle, so there's no toilet paper anywhere to be found. And she was she was washing her hands
Good,
because
good.
of the coronavirus, and she heard this banging going on in the stall, and she turned around, and a woman was coming out of the stall, had taken the toilet paper rolls out of the stall and was
No,
shoving them in her handbag and walking out. And she was like,
no.
there's no toilet paper, there's no toilet paper to be bought. And so then later on she said, she's like, well, there's none at the grocery store, there was none at Costco, there was none here, there, and everywhere. And she said I was in Home Depot for something else, and they actually had toilet paper. Who knew that Home Depot is like a giant garden
Well, you might be
home?
starting a stampede to Home Depot now,
Well,
Rose.
but for price gouging, they had 12 rolls of toilet paper for $18. I'm like, well, no wonder this woman's stealing toilet paper. Now I'm like, I'm going to Seattle at the end of this week. Do I need to bring my own toilet paper with me? She's like, I don't know. You might.
Yeah.
So
It's funny though that is the one thing that in modern civilization we can't do without is toilet paper. Okay, a friend of mine posted on social media today. She's like, okay, folks, you know that box of lost socks, unmatched socks that you have?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, come on, there are options. I guess we don't have newspapers in the same way.
Yeah.
Or the Eaton's catalog, that used to be big in Canada in the outhouses. Eaton was a catalog store. And
like
so
like Sears and Roebuck's catalog.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't have those options. It's hard to do it.
Leaves. There's always leaves. for any campers out there.
Or I guess it's time to install a bidet, maybe, Rose.
Oh, God.
Okay, well, this
conversation is
it's going down the toilet.
Yes.
Okay, so the good news is there are options other than toilet paper out there. Honestly, folks, if need be, and you can always message Rose and I if you need some ideas if you run out. So that's the good news. And last week we did some tapping for our action step and our sanity tip. Today I would suggest cutting down on one's intake of the news and social media.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, even the WHO is recommending that you don't get your information from those sources. Go to WHO or CDC.
So World Health Organization or Center for
Disease Control. That's your US go-to. Well, the rest of us go to it as well.
That sounds great. Yeah. Try to keep panic in check, at least about coronavirus, and put a little of that panic towards climate change.
Yeah, let's divvy it up a bit. Let me see if I can find a quote. I got an email from ACEP, which is the Association of Comprehensive Energy Psychology, and they have an annual conference which is coming up in May, and they are already contacting people about it. And the fellow who wrote it is a psychologist, and he talks about looking at the fear-based messages. He says, absolutely, stay on top of the developments from the CDC and the WHO. And he talked about kind of what we touched on last week, about fear being this predominant message that we're getting. And he says that pattern in the news media and the populace is drama and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And his number one intervention, which is our action step, is turn off the TV. And he says, when people are scared and there's a great deal of confusion, not only do they tend to watch the TV, they do it with their boundaries down.
What does that mean?
That because they're fearful, they have less ability to filter.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
So they're just absorbing all of it.
Exactly. So he says, as I've been watching and reading, I've simply become aware of this disturbing pattern of fear mongering. Let me give you two examples. CNN was regularly using the phrase, the deadly virus. For instance, they said, when we come back from whatever commercial, we'll discuss the latest developments with the deadly coronavirus. Is the use of the word deadly really helpful? Of course not. It is accurate that the virus leads to more deaths than the flu, but about 98% of people recover. So it just creates more fear. And I love this. He says, by the way, you never hear people saying the deadly automobile, despite the fact that it kills, exactly, it kills 1.25 million people a year, every year. So.
Yep. Interesting. Yep.
Yes, but let's talk about deadly climate change. Maybe that's what we should do.
Deadly climate change. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to because I think as environmentalists, we're wanting to massage it enough to make it palatable enough so that people will discuss it. Right. So maybe as environmentalists, we've backed off from making it sound as urgent as it needs to sound in order to get the reaction. Although we're starting to see the language change from climate change to climate crisis to climate catastrophe.
Emergency and catastrophe.
Yeah.
Well, and also we are warned by social scientists who study this thing that language is important and people shut down if you make it fear-based, except apparently if their response was to run out and buy toilet paper. All right. Well, conversation is to be continued.
Absolutely. That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.